I'm Dr. Annette Mercatant. I'm the Medical Health Officer of St. Clair County. On behalf of the Health Department and the County's Board of Health, I'd like to welcome you all to this presentation by the Ontario Power Generation, or OPG. Our intent is very simple. It's to provide an opportunity to hear firsthand what our Canadian neighbors have studied and what they are proposing. We hope that this information is helpful. It will improve the quality and outcome of our collective dialogue because we believe knowledge is power. We want the best possible information to move forward as a community. We are not here to support nor condemn, but rather to find the best information available and to continue the discussion. Please write down your questions for our speakers on the cards provided. The process for that is we want you to identify yourself. We'll collect the questions, and at the end of the presentation, we will ask our presenters these questions and ask them to respond for whatever time is allowed. If we have unanswered questions, our speakers have agreed to receive those later, and we will respond to them, and we will post them as well on our website. This presentation in its entirety will be posted on the St. Clair County and Health Department websites, and that's at www.stclaircounty.org. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Kevin Powers is the Director of Corporate Relations and Communications at Ontario Power Generation. Prior to OPG, he spent 6 years as Head of Communications at the Ontario Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure. Mark Jensen is the Director of Deep Geological Repository, Geoscience, and Research. He has been involved in radioactive waste management geoscience activities since 1986. So please welcome our guests. Gentlemen.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. Good morning. And thank you, Dr. Mercatant. Is that correct? Correct. Thank you for the opportunity to allow us to speak to this project, the Deep Geologic Repository. It's a project that we've been working on at Ontario Power Generation for the past 12 years or so. And we are going to try and do it justice in the next half hour to explain at a fairly high level some of the details about the project. But more to the point, we want to give you a sense of why we continue to believe and are reassured that this project will be safer for the public health of Ontario and Michigan residents, as well as for the Great Lakes. In order to talk about the project, though, I need to tell you a little bit about Ontario Power Generation. We are the largest provider of electricity in Ontario. We do about 60% of the power in Ontario. That comprises about 65 dams throughout the province, some gas-fired generation stations, and we own 3 nuclear power generating stations in Ontario and operate 2 of those. I've marked those out there as the Darlington Station and the Pickering Station, both located on the shores of Lake Ontario, and the Bruce Power Station, which we own but is operated by Bruce Power, which is on the shores of Lake Huron. And it is this facility that we're going to be focusing on a bit today with our discussion about the Deep Geologic Repository. A bit more about us, though, is that we are wholly owned by the Government of Ontario. We have a single shareholder, and that is the Government of Ontario, and we are responsible to that shareholder for all of our revenues as well as all of our responsibilities. Now, those 3 generating stations, the 3 nuclear generating stations that I pointed out, produce about 50% of the power in Ontario. Since nuclear began in Ontario 40 years ago, nuclear generation has comprised about 40% or about 50% of the generation in the province. Throughout that time, although nuclear power does not generate greenhouse gas emissions, it does create other forms of waste, nuclear waste, and we classify those into 3 categories. The first of these, and the category most known to people, is high-level waste. This is used fuel, this is highly radioactive used fuel, and this is not the subject of this deep geologic repository. There is a separate process going on in Canada right now where we are looking for a site to house all of the used fuel generated by commercial nuclear generating activity in the country. It is not going to be placed in this deep geologic repository, nor can it be, and I can talk a bit more about that a little later. What we're talking about here, though, today is intermediate level waste and low level waste. And intermediate level waste consists of the resins and filters of the can-do energy process. Now, some of these can be highly radioactive and can be radioactive for about 100,000 years. This is a very small proportion of the waste, and it is not heat generating, which is one of the things that differentiates intermediate level waste from high level waste. The other waste is low level waste. These are industrial items like gloves, mop heads, and other type of materials that you would find in any sort of industrial setting, but because they have been used in a nuclear facility, may be slightly radioactive, and so are are safely contained separate from regular garbage. Now, for the past 40 years, all of this low and intermediate level waste has been shipped to the Bruce nuclear facility, which I pointed out to you in Ontario. It has been brought there via trucks from the Pickering and Darlington station, and it is located, the facility is located within the Bruce nuclear site, which is, by the way, the largest nuclear facility in the world. I've got a little map of that waste facility. Right down here, you'll see where it is currently stored and has been safely stored for the past 40 years. It is done so above ground. It is done so in warehouse type of facilities, as you'll see here where I'm outlining. And some of the intermediate level waste is partially buried a few feet underground, and has been for the past 40 years. The proposal we have is to move the waste that is currently stored there about 100 yards to the facility, or to the area there that I've outlined as number 5, where it would be buried 680 meters or 2,000 or so feet underground in a facility custom built for low and intermediate level waste, and where our studies show that it would pose no adverse effects to the environment or to the people. And our aim here is to take a project in a facility that has safely stored the waste and make it safer. Now that move, that 100-yard move that I showed you from the existing facility to the proposed deep geologic repository has taken a long time, and we're still not there. The proposal started in 2002 when the community of Kincardine, which had been hosting the waste for about 30 years at that point, came to OPG and said, we'd be interested in hosting this for the long term, but we want a longer term solution and we want a safer solution. Since then, we have worked with the municipality of Kincardine and with scientists from around the world to come up with the proposal that we have today. We have studied in that time all aspects of the proposal, from public opinion to geoscience to geophysics to its potential effects on humans and aquatic biota. And our conclusions throughout all of these studies, which has been a very iterative process, which has been a very public process, and which has involved scientists, independent scientists from around the world, is that this project will not result in any adverse environmental effects to the people, the public, or the lakes. Here I've got a little illustration of what the deep geologic repository would look like. As you can see, it is located very deep underground. I have an illustration there of our CN Tower in Toronto. A more American equivalent would be 4 Washington monuments deep underground, where it would be protected by stable, low permeable rock formations that would act as natural barriers to the environment above, to the lake, and to the people. And this is at the core of our belief that this project will be safe. And to talk a little bit more about the geology behind this, we have Mark Jensen. Mark.
Thank you. I'd just like to spend a few moments here talking about the geoscience regarding this project and how it contributes to our understanding of long-term safety. So to start off with, I'd like to just speak a little bit about the DGR and the geology at a glance. From our studies over that last decade, we know that the Bruce site, located on that eastern shore of Lake Huron, is underlain by 840 meters of sedimentary rock. There's 34 individual formations identified. They're very flat-lying. They dip at about 10 meters per kilometer. Their age, they're fairly old geologically. They're 540 to 390 million years in age, so they've rested there for a long time. And we also know now that within these rocks, because of their low permeability and porosity and other characteristics, that contaminants and solutes would migrate by diffusion, which is the best possible barrier for radioactive waste management. The repository itself has been specifically located within a limestone formation called the Coburg Formation at a depth of 680 meters. It's 27 meters thick, and it's overlain by a shale cap of 200 meters of Ordovician age shale. So these are extremely low permeability rocks. The facility itself would have a main and a vent shaft. They're islanded. They're about 250 feet apart, so there's 2 shafts here. The main shaft itself is about 1 kilometer east of the lake, and the closest point of waste that would reside within the repository is 1.2 kilometers away. So just to get your bearings on this project, here's the Western Waste Management Facility, the interim facility that Kevin spoke about, where the waste from Ontario Power Generation stable of reactors is currently stored. Here's the head frame and the waste receipt building for the proposed facility. The 2 shafts, these would be concrete lined shafts. The main shaft would be 6.5 meters in diameter, the vent shaft 5 meters in diameter. Down at the repository horizon in the Coburg Formation at the shaft station here, there's a work services area, and then there's 31 rooms that would hold the 200,000 cubic meters of waste for which this repository is designed. The repository itself has these 2 panels. Each one of these rooms is nominally 8 meters wide, 6 to 7 meters high, and 250 meters long. In operations, it would operate for about 30 years, this first panel being filled, this second part of this, the second panel, and then this last part. After 35 years, the proposal would be to try to decommission the repository with a license from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. So the regional geology, we just kind of backed out here a little bit larger scale. You can see the Bruce Power Plant here, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Michigan itself. And what's shown on here is that structure that these sediments are associated with, which is called the Michigan Basin. It's extremely large and old. It's 600 kilometers in diameter. And at its deepest point here, just off Saugeen Bay, it's 4.8 kilometers deep, or 3 miles deep. But out here on the eastern flank, beneath the site, it's only 840 meters or so in depth. This feature in cross-section, so that you can see what the bedrock looks in it, is shown here. And you can see the cross-section, this red line cutting through the site and Michigan and beneath the Great Lakes. Just to point out a couple of features. One, the age of the rocks. So we have Cambrian up into Carboniferous or Pennsylvanian age. So that's the 540 to 350 million year old rock. We also have these units being very laterally extensive and fairly undeformed. We also have the Great Lakes. You can see they're fairly shallow, and the bedrock formations here are basically continuous and blanket the top of the repository horizon, which would be located here beneath the Bruce site. Another important point about this is that lateral continuity allows us to gain some insight and experience with these bedrock formations at depth here. So for instance, the Queenston Formation, which is a distinctive red formation, you'll see, and there's a hand sample down there if anyone's interested. And the other sample is of the Coburg limestone that would be at the repository level, occur near ground surface. So there are some openings at ground surface that are located more than 500 meters below ground surface at the Bruce site, so we can get a sense of what those look like. So if we go to those areas, you can see here on the north shore of Lake Ontario, this is the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station, and this is an opening within the Coburg Formation 30 meters below Lake Ontario. It extended out 1 kilometer, about 2/3 of a mile, and it was dry. This is the type of condition that we expect to see at 680 meters beneath the Bruce site. As we move further west, we get into the Queenston Shale. This is 80 meters thick beneath the Bruce site. It's part of a package of shale rocks that is 200 meters thick. And this is a 13-meter diameter test adit for the Niagara River Tunnel project. It was being excavated with a road header. Again, massive shale deposits that are low permeability and contain highly saline rock. And it was dry. And we move further west, we get into the shallow rocks beneath the Bruce site, and this is an example of the intake for the Bruce B plant, about 45 meters below ground surface in the shallow groundwater system that we know is permeable and that the shafts will have to intersect and pass through. So this is the sort of condition that we would expect within the upper 150 meters at the Bruce site, but certainly not the same as what we expect to see at the repository horizon, some 400, 500 meters below. So based on that regional understanding and of the geology, this was sort of the conceptual model that was put together of the site at the very beginning, and back in 2002, 2004. And what we're showing here is, again, the eastern flank of the Michigan Basin. You can see this is 160 kilometers, so that's 100 miles. It's large. The pink here represents the granitic rocks of the Precambrian Canadian Shield. Here we have the different bedrock units defined by the red lines here. You can see Lake Huron, the Bruce site. There's the repository there in the Coburg Formation beneath that 200 meters of shale. As part of this understanding, really the key thing that came out of it was the different groundwater systems and how they interacted with the Great Lakes. And at surface, we have that shallow system that is typical of that last picture I showed you. It's a permeable freshwater aquifer that is in direct contact with Lake Huron. Beneath that, we have Silurian age rocks. These rocks are around 400 million years old. They contain saline waters. They contain, or they're extremely low permeability. And just to give you an example, the waters in these rocks here is 10 times more saline than seawater. They're around 300 to 350 grams per liter, so it's extremely saline waters. And then we have this lowermost formation, or this lowermost groundwater system that contains extremely low permeability. It's 400 meters thick and extremely saline waters as well. And it's clear that over geologic time, the groundwater systems in these two areas, these two lowermost systems, have not been in contact with the Earth's surface. So they've been isolated for long periods of geologic time. So it was with this understanding of the site, the continuity of the units, their permeability and characteristics, natural resources, and these sorts of things that we came up at the very beginning of the process with these 7 hypotheses that we set out to test in our work, particularly in the last 5 years when we started doing detailed site characterization work in 2006. So we basically came up with the hypotheses that it was predictable, that we had organized structure of these sedimentary formations, that they were relatively undeformed and near horizontally layered and were of large lateral extent. We believed that there were natural barriers and multiple barriers. There wasn't just one bedrock formation we were relying on, there were multiple bedrock formations, which is unique in international radioactive waste management. Thirdly, that contaminant transport within the formations that would host and enclose the repository, that contaminant transport or solute migration would be diffusion dominated. This essentially means that contaminants would move at a rate of 1 millimeter per year or less. Natural resource potential was low. We looked at for salt. There is no salt beneath the site. Looked at oil and gas, even looked for shale gas and shale oil, and the potential is extremely low at the site. It's seismically quiet. This area is one of the quietest in North America. Geomechanically, that we could create the openings safely and that they would remain open under events like extreme earthquakes and glaciation. And perhaps most importantly, that shallow groundwater resources and the Great Lakes would be isolated by the positioning of this repository at depth. So all the work that we have done, the drilling, the geophysics, the geochemistry, the geomechanics, long-term climate change, glacial erosion, has all focused on providing reliable information to truth out and test whether these hypotheses are correct. We didn't do this alone. This was a large team was created over a period of 5 years, and we had 3 campaigns of the geoscience work. In particular, we had technical oversight, independent oversight of the whole project throughout its entire execution by colleagues in the French and the Swiss and the American radioactive waste management programs, as well as the Canadian at Derek Martin at the University of Alberta. We had a number of specialist consultants working on this program, and we took advantage of some of the techniques developed for the waste isolation pilot plant down in New Mexico in terms of hydraulic conductivity testing at depth, borehole testing. So we had a number of international organizations also contribute to the characterization of this work program. And last, we had a large number of universities that were coordinated in their activities on this program and have had an opportunity to look, peer review, and see the data for themselves and draw their own conclusions. So at the end of all that work, our position and our submission that we made back in April 2011, our submission of the environmental impact statement and the preliminary safety report for this facility that was combined with a license for site preparation and construction. The geological attributes here, that we have thick sedimentary bedrock formations that are undeformed and traceable, and we know that from core collected beneath the site at locations that bound the repository itself. There's these thick multiple barrier formations, these low permeability formations that I've spoken about. There's more than 10 that host and enclose the repository. The waters in these hosting formations and the barrier formations are extremely old. We believe that they are what we would call connate, or they were there at the time that these sediments were deposited. Some of the radioisotope dating suggests that they are 260 million years old, or likely even greater. So these waters in these formations are extremely old. The host formations are mechanically strong. There's low potential for natural resources, so for things like intrusion and whatnot, there doesn't appear to be a strong reason to do investigations in this area for natural resources. It is in an area of low seismic hazard, and we've been able to, through multiple lines of reasoning, looking at geochemistry, looking at the physical characteristics of the rock and other sort of natural analogs, come to a very strong conclusion that transport in these rocks has been diffusion dominated despite glaciations. And 22,000 years, this building was covered by more than a mile of ice. And so the conditions have changed, and this system and its signatures that we've looked at through these site investigations have suggested that these conditions have remained constant and that the groundwater system in which the repository would be has been resilient to change. So finally, with this stable and resilient geology, colleagues of mine do long-term safety analyses, and these safety analyses are used to assess what sort of impact the facility would have on the repository itself. And here you can see a pathway analysis cartoon that shows how we direct any contaminants that may be released from the repository. In the long term, all those analyses under normal conditions, you can see it here. Apologize, you can't see the numbers here, but the key is that under normal evolution, the repository is not expected to cause, well, it's expected not to be virtually zero impact. The cases here look at normal evolution, and they also look at uncertainties through sensitivity analyses. And all of those analyses that have been conducted, the sum of them is 100,000 times less than the regulatory criterion for a facility of this type. And what is also important to recognize is that these doses, or these maximum doses, occur at time frames well beyond 1 million years. That's how good the geology is to contain and isolate the site. The other point I would make is that in these normal evolution scenarios, that it assumes that the receptor is a house directly above the repository shafts. If you were to look at someone that had a different lifestyle that was more associated with the lake, those doses would be 1,000 times less. So that would be 100 million times less than regulatory criterion at 1 million plus years. So we feel that there's extremely strong basis for, because of these huge safety margins, that this facility will render these wastes harmless forever. So I'd just like to pass it back to Kevin to discuss in these last 4 slides some of the reviews that have undergone through this environmental assessment process. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So we have, Mark has done a good job of providing a very high-level look at some of the conclusions we've come to, but we're not the only ones who've come to these sorts of conclusions. We have shared our data widely with many different independent scientists and different independent organizations in Canada and around the world. And I have here some of the reviews, some of the quotes from some of the reviews from organizations that you may be familiar with. The Environmental Protection Agency, for example, reviewed all of our data and said, in comparison to other international programs, the proposed DGR site at 2,230 feet beneath the Bruce nuclear site is the deepest planned facility in the world, is bounded by the thickest assemblage of low permeable cap rocks, and is isolated from surface and drinking water. The Department of Environmental Quality also reviewed our data, our geoscientific data, and said, in summary, the Resource Management Division has reviewed the environmental impact statement in supporting radiological and geological studies and has no technical objections to the conclusion reached in the many various studies. We've also provided our information to medical officers of health, and here we have a quote from the medical officer of health for the Kincardine area, who said that based on my experience as a doctor, a specialist in radiological health, and a public health officer, I believe the DGR currently before the community for approval is a safe, long-term solution for the storage of low and intermediate level waste. In addition to these, we have been in the process of a very long regulatory process over the past 5 years or so. In September of this year, that process started to reach a conclusion when we went for a 25-day public hearing in front of the most rigorous form of environmental assessment there is in Canada. This is called a joint review panel, and it is a panel it is an independent panel that is selected from our Environment Ministry and our nuclear regulator to examine all of the evidence, positive and negative, against and for the deep geologic repository, and come up with a recommendation on whether or not this project should go ahead. The panel was comprised of 3 experts, a geologist, a biologist, and an engineer, who sat for 25 days and listened to hundreds of questions and interventions from the public, from experts from around the world, and are now tasked with writing their recommendation. Right now, they are currently in a detailed review of the information that's on the record, as well as the 12,500 pages of information that we provided them, and the thousands of pages of evidence provided by others. The registry will remain open, which means comments are still allowed to come in until all information requests have been answered. And this panel is convinced it has sufficient information to close the public record. It will notify the public when that is the case, and participants will be allowed 30 more days to submit. It will then provide a report within 30 days and submit it to the Federal Minister of the Environment, who will have 120 days to make a final decision. And if the Federal Minister of Environment decides it is the case, they may take that decision to Federal Cabinet. The decision from the panel is expected late this year or early next year, with a decision from the Minister of Environment or Cabinet perhaps the following year. And this is out of our hands, so this is an approximation. With that, we'll conclude the formal component of our presentation, and we will open it up for questions.
The first question is from Jim Block from the Voice News. With limestone underlying much of the southern Ontario, why a nuclear waste dump so close to the greatest surface supply of fresh water in North America? Again, this goes back to my questions earlier, the idea of your site selection and why you chose this site to focus on and not others.
Do you want to answer the site selection question?
Sure, I'll answer the site selection question, and then Mark will work on will answer the questions around geology. As I mentioned in my presentation, back in, I think it was 2001, the municipality of Kincardine came to us requesting or saying that they'd be willing to host a longer-term solution for Ontario's nuclear waste. We then worked with them and worked with our team to examine whether or not it was possible to house this waste permanently and safely in a location very close to where it was already stored. Now, there are many natural advantages to doing this. In storing the waste close to where 40% of it already exists, we reduce any of the risk of transportation hazards and transporting the waste for long distances. Secondly, and very importantly, we have a willing host community. In Ontario and in places around the world, it is very difficult to find a host community for any infrastructure project, let alone a repository for nuclear waste. Thirdly, and as our studies began to show, we had there in Kincardine some of the best geology in the world for housing one of these sites. And so with a site that was very close to where the waste already existed, in a willing host community, and in some of the best rock in the world, we decided that that was a very good site to continue our studies. And Mark can talk a bit more about the rock.
So in terms of the rock and why the Coburg Formation and the limestone, it's in an exceptionally good geologic setting that has been shown to be very stable and resilient to geologic events such as earthquakes and glaciation, and even mountain building events that occurred after the sediments were deposited. Our site-specific investigations have looked at the chemistry of the pore fluids that are contained within these rocks. It has looked at the hydraulic conductivity. It has looked at natural analogs of signatures in the chemistry and in the hydraulics of these rocks. And what we now know is that these rocks are perhaps some of the lowest permeability rocks that have been measured in any radioactive waste management program in the world. And I'm including France and Switzerland and Belgium and Japan and even the States. And so that this situation, this geologic situation that we have at the Bruce is ideal for radioactive waste management in the sense that we have extremely mechanically strong rock in which we can excavate the repository openings. And then we have the shale cap rock, which provides a strong barrier between the repository and the surface. This combination is extremely, extremely good.
I'm going to kind of paraphrase this next question, but it has to do with other nuclear waste facilities around the world in the U.S. that have failed or have had breaches. Ed McCardle brings up the plutonium detected a half mile from, I apologize, the WIPP in New Mexico. We have received other information about other nuclear waste facilities that have failed. How can you mitigate against similar failures, and what have you learned from other facilities that have been used, waste facilities?
Right. So you know, in terms of that, experience is key. And looking back at the past, certainly, you know, there have been facilities that have been brought to my attention in the past, like the Assay mine and these sorts of facilities, which were, of course, not DGR purpose facilities. They were mines that were basically taken on as radioactive waste management facilities back in the 60s and 70s, and really don't apply to the sort of situation that we have here, where we have a purpose-built DGR in a stable geologic setting. In terms of the waste isolation pilot plant, my understanding is, having visited it back in 1999 in March and having some colleagues that work there, is that it has operated underground as expected. There have been some incidents in the last month or so, but my understanding is that the procedures in place to manage those incidents have been carried out, and there has been no consequence.
A couple questions about transporting the nuclear waste, concerns about transporting it through our waterways. Will you be importing waste from the U.S. and other areas of Canada? And what is, I think there was one other question about the transport, how is it currently transported to that area?
Right, so the waste that is currently there and the only waste that will ever be contained in this facility is from Ontario Power Generation's 3 nuclear facilities. Canadian regulations are such that the federal government is responsible for the isolation and the containment of high-level nuclear waste, but nuclear operators, such as Ontario Power Generation, such as Hydro-Quebec, such as New Brunswick Power, are each individually responsible for coming up with their own solutions for their own low and intermediate level waste. These wastes, as I mentioned, have been transported from the Pickering and Darlington stations for 40 years now, accident-free, and have been done so via truck. There is no plans to, and there are no plans to import waste from the United States or from other jurisdictions in Canada for this. or via boat or any other means of transportation.
Thank you. A question about, since there is so much shale, will there be fracking there? Issues of fracking and that impact on the safety of this?
There will be no issues associated with fracking. I mean, fracking is a word that's associated with shale gas and injecting high-pressure fluids to induce fracturing in the shales so that they can enhance recovery of gas and oil. Those sorts of activities will not be associated with this project.
Thank you. How can you maintain the integrity of the shafts and not have water move between the geological units and ultimately fill the repository with water? Says the weak link is the maintenance of the shafts over hundreds of thousands of years.
Right. So I'd like to separate that into two bits. One is the operations bit, which we can assume, just for the purpose of this conversation, to be from the time of operations, 50 years, and then what happens after that, we'll all call post-closure. So in the 50 years, what happens is that the repository shafts will be concrete lined through that upper groundwater system that I showed here. That was number one. It'll be a hydrostatic liner as much as a meter thick to prevent water from going into the shaft. Once we're below that horizon, the rock is so low permeability that we do not expect major inflows into the shafts, but there will be some lining and drainage that will allow the shafts to operate safely during the operation period of that 50 years. After the 50 years, once a decision is made to decommission the site, another license will have to be sought. Yeah, I just want to be clear on this. What we're proposing is to get a site preparation and construction license. Once the facility is constructed, we need to get an operating license. And then once the facility is finished operation, we have to go get a decommissioning license. At that point in time, what we would do is we would remove all the shaft lining and all the shaft features and reinstall a bentonite. It's a swelling clay and asphalt barriers in these shafts to seal the repository into the Kohlberg Formation so that it no longer is in contact with the surface. So it's that longevity of those shaft seals that in part is being relied upon for the safety of the repository.
And a follow-up on that question, will there be any further monitoring of the site after it's decommissioned?
Yes, and as part of the proposal, there is a geoscience verification plan. So despite all the independent peer review and work that we've done here, during construction, there would have to be additional work done as we go underground to verify the conditions and to continue with our environmental monitoring program. That type of program, which would be decided at the time of the operating license, would be continued through operations, and it would be continued to a point where society felt comfortable that the site was operating as predicted and closure was possible.
A couple questions about protecting against serious accidents or terrorism. If a serious accident or terrorism would occur, how do you propose replacing drinking water and the safety of our drinking water in southeastern Michigan and Ontario? As you know, the importance of this water source to so many people.
The Bruce nuclear facility, as I mentioned, is one of the largest nuclear facility in the world. It is an extremely secure site. It is heavily, there are security guards, and it is heavily guarded. The containers in which the low and intermediate level waste would be housed weigh approximately 25 tons. They're not the sort of objects that terrorists could take and sort of pick up and bring anywhere, notwithstanding the ability to get into the site in the first place. Low and intermediate level waste, in addition to that, is not the sort of waste that would be a prime target for terrorist activities. In the popular imagination, when terrorists use nuclear materials for their attacks, it is high-level waste that would be used, and that's not what we're talking about here.
There's a series of questions. Some of these have been answered. I apologize to Ms. Gill. about the transportation and the decommissioning. I'll skip those. But other questions I don't believe have been answered is what kind of containers we'll be using, and are they vented? Let's start with that.
These are custom-built containers, and as I mentioned, they are carbon steel and concrete lined and weigh approximately 25 tons. They are custom-built for this purpose, and meant to withstand many, many years of housing the waste.
When do you plan to start construction?
Construction will depend on, the construction timing will depend on when we get a decision from the from the Joint Review Panel and from the Minister of Environment. The panel may come out with a number of recommendations on the design of the facility, and those will all have to be taken into consideration before we even begin construction on this. So it's quite a few years in the future.
Will the DRG be accepting used steam generators?
Yes, there is a proposal to have the used steam generators are low and intermediate level waste, and under this proposal they would be housed in this facility.
Is it true that there is an underground lake beneath the disposal site?
No. No, I mean, from all our investigations, the permeabilities of the rock are extremely low, and there is no underground lake beneath the repository site.
Yeah, just one point of clarification to Mark's points. He mentions that the ancient water formations in the ancient rock, these are microscopic particles of water. It's not, they are not large bodies of water.
Yeah, in fact, you can see from these hand samples over here, this is typical of the rock that we retrieve when we core the site, and you can get a sense that the water that I'm speaking about resides in the pore space of those hand samples.
We have a question about the financing of the facility. Is it dependent on receiving the wastes?
No. Since OPG began producing nuclear power, we have put a segregated fund aside, and we have been putting money into that fund for the past 40 years in order to create a facility for the low and intermediate level waste.
And I think these are some more general questions. The presentation included many statements beginning with "it appears" and "we feel." Does the extensive research show that there is or is not a chance for the low or mid-level waste to reach Lake Huron, or is that impossible to definitely know?
The work that we have done in terms of geoscience has provided a fairly compelling case with multiple lines of reasoning that has been independently reviewed, that shows that the waste would be positioned in a geologic setting that is ancient, geologically old, and has been stable. And we're using that geologic environment to house this waste and to isolate it from the surface, Great Lakes, groundwater resources, so that it can cause harm to no one, no thing, the environment ever.
I'd like to just propose a second question then. Is there an analysis of the relative risk of building this repository versus leaving the current waste in a current above-ground setting?
That was a question that was put to the program as part of the public review process. And as part of that public review process, we have things called information requests. And the JRP panel made a request to OPG to conduct such an assessment, and that assessment will be submitted in April.
Thank you. Is this PowerPoint that you presented to us today available on the web? Of course, it'll be available on our website, which you provided, but is there more information on your website?
We have an awful lot of information on our website. We have a sort of a public website, which is opgdgr.com, which gives a good a good public overview of the Deep Geologic Repository. And on that, it has links to all of the documents, all 12,500 pages of evidence that we have collected over the past years, where you are free to look at that. In addition, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has all of the testimony from the 25 days of hearings, all of the questions that were posed before that, and all of the answers OPG has provided. So there is a wealth of data out there.
One final question. We've done very well, and these are excellent questions. Thank you to our group. Will such extravagant measures that are needed to store the waste of nuclear power, why do we continue to generate it? That's
probably a question for a higher pay grade than myself. Ontario's long-term energy plan calls for the continued use of nuclear power over the long term, and we continue to generate that power. As far as nuclear power around the world, I can't comment.
I believe that is all the questions I've received in writing, unless I've managed to miss something. So since we have a few extra minutes, I encourage any last-minute questions. Okay. Thank you, Kay. What about the Grenville? Does that say Grenville?
Grenville.
Grenville fault line that is right near the Bruce Peninsula.
Right, so the Grenville Front Tectonic Zone is a feature within the crystalline rock beneath it. It's a feature that is well known and understood. It's 30 kilometers to the west of the site. It was last known to have movement a billion years ago. We are very confident in the work that we've done in looking at earthquakes and those sorts of things. That the Grenville Front has been quiescent for that period of time, and that it poses no significant threat to this repository.
The U.S. Geological Society, USGS, has connected earthquakes with fracking. In both Michigan and Ontario, both have active fracking occurring. How do you propose to keep fracking from occurring near the sites for the long periods of time necessary?
Right. So the one thing is that with shale gas, you need certain conditions to exist, and one of those is you need the organic content in the shale formation, and you also need the burial temperatures. And in Michigan, as you saw how deep the sediments were, that you may have provided the temperatures and the organic material and the thickness of the source formations to allow fracking to be perhaps economic. Within the Bruce region, though, we do not have that. We do not have burial temperatures that go above 60 degrees C, and we do not have the organic content. Our formations are very thin, so the potential for shale gas and fracking activities within the Bruce and surrounding area would be extremely small.
One more question. Will radioactive or other gases be released from the containers of waste, and how will they be vented once the dump is closed?
The gases will be formed once the repository is sealed, as I said, in that kind of post-closure phase. These gases will be primarily methane. The pressures of the gases that will build up in the repository over periods of thousands of years might get up to around 7 to 9 megapascals, which is much less than the weight of the overlying rock, so we're not concerned about fracturing. It is expected that these gases would be contained within the repository for a time period of in excess of 50 to 60,000 years, which is when the next glaciation would occur, and it would render it harmless simply because the major contributor is carbon-14, which has a half-life of around 5,000 years. And so we do not expect complications from gas in this proposal.
The next question is somewhat related to that. How long will waste remain dangerous or radioactive?
The waste that's being placed into the repository will decay with time, and essentially will decay to the same level of radioactivity as actually the host rock that lies above it in the natural shales within a periods of tens of thousands of years.
Next question. It would seem you have an ideal site from a scientific perspective. Are there any regulatory safeguards to prevent expansion and potential sale of space for other nuclear waste?
The nuclear arena in Canada, much like the United States, is highly regulated. Any desire to expand or to have any other facility for nuclear waste or nuclear power on that would have to go through an extremely rigorous environmental assessment process and would have to be viewed by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission as well as a joint review panel, a panel of experts, as not causing any adverse effects to the environment.
I do believe I reviewed all the cards. Are there any questions that I've missed?
My question was about decommissioning after the shaft is closed up and so on. Is there going to be any monitoring after that time? I don't believe you answered that. So after the 50 years or whatever, are you going to continue monitoring?
There would be, at the time that the decommissioning license was set, a plan to what monitoring was required of the facility, so that there would be monitoring conducted of the facility at a period in the initial stages of decommissioning, yes.
Initial. But what about all the years after?
So that would be determined by, much like we're looking for a license right now to construct the facility. When we have a decommissioning license, all of that would need to be sorted out at that point to the satisfaction of the Nuclear Safety Commission.
In your literature, you talk about abandonment of the site. Does that mean? I guess I'm still not clear. Are you just going to close it up and that's it?
Yeah, that's the unfortunate technical term for the license through the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, but. I don't think it speaks to what the level of. We don't plan on leaving it and disappearing by any stretch.
We need a license.
Yeah, we would need a license to abandon.
I'll open it up. Any other questions, sir?
It brought to our attention that this depository will be expanded to decommissioning waste from the aging reactors and all components, large components like steam generators, reactor cores, shields, and so forth. I don't believe this has been addressed, which would perhaps double the capacity of the waste.
We don't know. There is. Yes, we do plan to when the plants are decommissioned many years from now. There is a plan to take the low and intermediate level waste, and it's again only low and intermediate level waste, and to bury it in the same facility. But before anything like that could happen, we would have to go through the exact same process that we've described here, which is an extremely lengthy environmental assessment process. And the reason we are not doing that now is because we haven't been able to, we can't properly categorize exactly what the volume of that waste would be or when it's going to be. And so when we have a clearer idea of what that is, we will then begin another environmental assessment process for that.
Any other questions? Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just was wondering how rigorous you've been in trying to disprove all of this. I mean, you talk about independent scientists, but surely there are scientists who are saying this isn't necessarily the best idea, and here's why. I'd just like to hear more about that.
This process has been more than a decade long. All of the information that we've collected during the course of the work has been publicly available. We've just gone through, we submitted the final documents necessary for EA approval and for a site preparation and construction license back in April 2011. They have all been publicly available, all these documents since that time. And this is part of the Canadian environmental assessment process, which is the most rigorous that we can subject a project to. We've sat through and we've answered 500 questions through this process, written questions to which we had to provide written answers. These are all on the website, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency website, all these answers. The answers were provided within the given schedules. The answers, or the questions could have come from anyone, from anywhere. In addition to that review of the public review, I mean, these reports have been looked at, and I mean, Kevin has shown examples of the US EPA and the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, the Geologic Survey of Canada, the Ontario Geologic Survey, the Ministry of Natural Resources, all federal and provincial agencies that should be concerned. Health Canada have reviewed our documents, have had an opportunity to sit in public and question and provide their review of our assessment. We've had peer reviews done of our work. The USGS has had we've given them the data to let them run to their own conclusions, and they've written a paper written recently in the EOS article about the potential for shales for radioactive waste management in the American program. I know of no program that has been subjected to more peer review and public scrutiny than this. It is a very, very good proposal, and it's an exceptionally good site.
And ultimately, the joint review panel is going to be the one that decides whether or not this project can go through.
So, I'm sorry.
I just
Yes,
have
ma'am.
a question. Obviously, it's going to be remotely controlled when you go down. Nobody's going down there to actually move this stuff around, are they? Is it going to be a system where it's remotely controlled to move that stuff when it's down inside?
No.
How's that going to work?
Well, basically the same way it works now at the Western Waste Management Facility, except underground, that, you know, waste packages would be sent down by themselves in the main shaft, but staff would be there to receive and to handle the packages at surface and below ground. So staff would be there to position these packages using forklift type conveyances and these sorts of things.
So how do the staff get down there? Are they coming down the same shaft? Is there another shaft? Or?
Well, they would come down the same shaft, but never with a waste package.
Oh, I see. But then, so they'll be working around down there, and then if there was a problem ever, the waste would just come back up if you had a new package, or you'd send people down there, or that's why I asked about the vents and the casks too. Are they vented?
The storage structures are carbon steel boxes. There are some that require shielding, concrete shielding and that sort of thing. But this waste, this proposal doesn't require robust packaging. It basically requires that the packaging be sufficient so that we could retrieve the waste if there was a necessity to do that during operations.
One more question, and then we'll wrap this up, please.
Yeah. The Great Lakes is 90% of North America's fresh water, and Michigan shares the Lake Huron waters, the shoreline. And why were we not included in the impacted area?
We've been working representatives from Michigan have been involved in the environmental assessment process on this since 2005. There's been multiple inputs from Michigan throughout the process.
I want to thank everyone for coming. I hope this information was helpful, and I continue to hope that this dialogue can continue so people understand these issues and we can move forward as a community. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming and sharing your information with us, and I wish you all a very good afternoon. Thank you much.